He's not a student.
This is your.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. Okay, good morning, everybody. First, of course, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give a talk here. It's a great honor and great pleasure to come to these meetings. So I'm going to talk about direct observation of the ferroelectric switching into dimensional molybdenum disulfide. But before that, I would like just to make an introduction into the business of combining 2D semiconductor materials with ferroelectric thin films, what kind of useful thing we can get from this combination. So, you know that over 100 years long history of ferroelectricity. So this field has been through ups and downs. And ups are usually associated with specific models, materials, or development that came into fashion. And if you look at really not very far distant history, so we can mention the age of integration, which was associated with the development of switchable ferroelectric thin films, then age of multifunctionality with the development due to the development of multiferroic materials, and now we can talk about the age of 2D ferroelectricity due to the multiple reports about the appearance of polar ordering in 2D systems, even if their three-dimensional counterparts didn't show any polarization. So the outline of my talk is here. So the first part, I will be talking about optoelectronic and transport phenomena in the hybrid semiconductor ferroelectric structures. And in the second part, I will be discussing the appearance of polarization in two-dimensional ferroelectrics, and particularly the challenges associated with experimental confirmation of this ferroelectric nature. So the business of two-dimensional semiconductor ferroelectric materials has been kind of taken off several years ago. And in spite of being relatively young field, so there are a lot of progress already. So there are a number of reports showing that at least demonstrated proof of concept of a number of devices that potentially can find application in a variety of memory devices, data storage, and so forth. So, but what's the physical mechanism behind kind of combining and using new functionality in these systems? So it's a conventional field effect where the switching of polarization in the ferroelectric layer leads to the change of the population at the interface, thereby changing the conductivity of this interfacial channel. And because of the kind of huge variety of ferroelectrics and two-dimensional materials, so there are multiple possibilities of kind of using different type of properties in order to extract something new. So as for the two-dimensional semiconductors, so the most actively studied group is transition metal dihalogen represented by MoS2. So there are also phosphides and the recently kind of discovered group of materials of MoS2 that exhibit extremely broad range of physical properties, starting from dielectric to magnetic to conducting and even superconducting. So as for the ferroelectric systems, you know that there is again a very rich choice, starting with perovskite ferroelectric, simple oxides like hafnia and zirconia, ferroelectric polymers, also van der Waals materials that recently kind of popped up. So a lot of challenges here, but I'm not going to talk about it. Just to mention that really the main challenge is related to the integration of these materials, particularly related to the control of the properties of the interface between these materials. But on the lab level, there are a lot of demonstration that the field effect can be indeed used in order to modulate the conductivity of these systems. And on this slide, you can see the combination of PZT with MoS2. So where the switching of polarization in the PZT that was kind of confirmed by PFM leads to the change of the conductivity of MoS2. So the important point here that the effect is much stronger than in the case of the use of graphene in combination with ferroelectrics, which again confirms that using TMD instead of graphene probably holds more promise in terms of application. So in addition to this control of the in-plane transport through polarization reversal, there is also a possibility of using the modulation of the out-of-plane transport by switching of the polarization. Since in this case, so we know that switching of polarization leads to the change of the conductivity of MoS2, meaning that if we are talking about structures with the capacitors type of device, so depending on polarization direction, we can drive our MoS2 either to more conducting or less conducting state. So in the latter case, when we have more conducting state, so we can switch polarization in the whole volume covered by the MoS2, while if you want to switch back when the MoS2 in the less conducting state, so that wouldn't be possible, we will be able only to switch polarization in the underlying ferroelectric layer locally. So in this case, we can basically control polarization deterministically, so we can modulate the duration and amplitude of the driving voltage, and we can actually exercise the domain engineering and thereby induce local control of transport in the TMD layer. And this opens a possibility of development of hybrid structures where functionality depends on the nanodomain engineering. So as is shown here. So if you have this kind of hybrid structure with MoS2 and the ferroelectric, so by writing conducting challenge by switching polarization underneath only in the layer that is scanned, in the area scanned by the tip. So you can basically write a conducting channel between these source drain electrodes, and you can modulate, you can erase, you can rewrite it, and this would be accompanied by the change in the switchable change in the conductivity of these field effect transistors. So the scaling here is enormous. So basically, if you kind of relate it to the width of the domain bridge here, so then we can talk about the characteristic scaling of approximately 10 nanometers. So of course, you can kind of not limit yourself with one linear domains, but you can write as many as you like, and this appearance of each additional bridge will be accompanied by the change of the conductance. So basically, we can tune the conductivity of these systems by drawing specific types of domain patterns. So the next thing that would be useful to mention is that both two-dimensional semiconductors, which are narrowband semiconductors and ferroelectrics, so both materials are quite sensitive to the optical excitation, which means that we can expect that optical illumination would lead to quite significant changes in the conductivity, which is again demonstrated both in the case of the field effect transistors and in the tunnel junctions. So in the case of MoS2 in combination with PZT, so you can see there is a huge change in the conductivity with an on-off ratio reaching 5 orders of magnitude. In the situation of the tunnel junction, so the change is not that great, so but still a couple orders of magnitude, and it's mostly related to the change in the conductance of in the off state. So the on state basically is not strongly affected by light, but the off state could be changed by optical illumination quite significantly. And there could be two explanations. First, we can assume that there is a change in the MoS2 conductivity because of the illumination, or there could be optically induced switching of polarization in the underlying ferroelectric layer. So, and to verify which mechanism would be correct, so the following experiments have been carried out. So we had this barium titanate in combination with MoS2 imaged using PFM in the dark. So there is quite robust polarization in the barium titanate that is visualized through MoS2. And if you keep scanning in the dark and then at some point you turn the light on, so then all of a sudden there is no PFM signal at all. So which would be equivalent due to the disappearance of the polarization state at all. So, but if you're persistent enough and you keep scanning, then at some point the amplitude signal would recover, which would mean the reappearance of the polarization state, but it will be characterized by the opposite direction of polarization, meaning that polarization in barium titanate has been switched simply by illumination without applying any bias. And of course, everything has to do something with optical absorption in MoS2. So, of course, we confirmed that this is the case by just imaging barium titanate state after removing of MoS2. So, but during the optical absorption in MoS2, there is a kind of transformation of the intralayer exciton to the interlayer exciton, which leads to some kind of a disbalance of the screening charges at the interface, which makes one polarization state, specifically upward polarization state, not stable. And if there is some driving force to switch polarization downward, for example, due to the existence of the built-in electric field at the bottom interface, then you can expect the optically induced switching of polarization. So there were first principle calculations, but performed by our collaborators from University of Luxembourg and in LIST, but I would rather skip it. So I would just like to mention that this effect is not unique for barium titanate MoS2 combination. So group of Marina and Alexei performed similar experiments using a combination of PZT and tungsten disulfide, and they observed exactly the same effect. So they illuminated this system with light, observed the change in the contrast of the PZT underneath this tungsten disulfide flake. So meaning that there was a polarization reversal, and this also accompanied by the change in the in-plane transport. So which could be used in principle as the basis for the optoelectronic memory device. So just to summarize this part, we can state that employment of 2D semiconductors in conjunction with ferroelectrics provide very straightforward and very efficient way of enhancement of the electronic transport properties through the kind of polarization coupled modulation of 2D layer materials behavior. And this combination also opens a possibility for optical modulation of polarization and therefore optical control of the electronic properties, thereby providing kind of extended functionality. And again, to repeat, there is a huge number of possible variations given the kind of very broad, large families of both 2D semiconductors and ferroelectric materials. And now let's talk about polarization ordering in 2D semiconductors. So in the previous part, I was talking about combining semiconductor and ferroelectric properties in the hybrid structure, but it would be probably much more useful if we have both semiconductor and ferroelectric functionality present in the same material. So, and again, recently, over the last probably 7 to 8 years, there was a surge in theoretical papers predicting the appearance of the polar ordering in a number of two-dimensional materials. So why all of a sudden all these materials, transition metal, halcogenized, so the semiconductor of the 3-6 families, phosphorines, elemental 5-group monolayers. So why all of a sudden people expect that they would be ferroelectric. So the reason is that it's quite easy to lose the center of symmetry in two-dimensional systems, which is a prerequisite for the ferroelectric behavior. It's not it's necessary, but it's not sufficient condition. But the first thing, you need to get rid of the center of symmetry, and so there are a number of mechanisms that would provide this disappearance of the central symmetry. For example, they could be just polar distortion in the monolayers, or it could be kind of a specific type of layer stacking. So there could be chemical functionalization. There could be twisting of layers with respect to each other. So recently there were, again, a number of reports about a generation of the polarization patterns using this approach. And of course, MoS2 was one of the first 2D materials where the appearance of ferroelectricity has been predicted several years ago. So prediction was made not about the most stable, thermodynamically stable 2H phase of MoS2, but rather about this distorted 1T phase. So theoretically, everything worked out very well. So there is indeed trimerization that was shown to lead to the kind of appearance of the dipole moment aligned perpendicular to the planes. So there were a number of attempts to prove this prediction experimentally, but it didn't work out because of several issues. The most important is that the polarization value in these materials would be rather small, so which would make any experimental method kind of to be very challenging to use. Most importantly is that all these 2D semiconductors in the polar state, they were shown to be quite conducting, and the experiment was also showing that they were extremely leaky. So no possibility to apply the electric field and induce polarization reversal, which would be, again, the sufficient additional elements in proving the ferroelectric nature of these materials. So in our approach, we decided to first fabricate this distorted phase of MoS2 by using the chemical treatment of 2H MoS2 phase in the lithium butylate. So in this case, the lithium ions that go into the space between individual monolayers would cause distortion of the unit cells and lead to the kind of doubling of the unit cell parameter, and basically to trimerization. And this would lead to the shift of the molybdenum ions within the plane of each monolayer. So as a result, in order to maintain the bonding length between the sulfur and molybdenum ions, so there is a displacement of the sulfur ions that would lead to the appearance of the dipole moment. So this new phase has been kind of characterized structurally. So we indeed show that it's different from the 2H phase, and therefore we expected that it would be ferroelectric. So the question was, how would we prove this on experiment? Because again, electrical control of polarization here would be out of question. It was a semi-metal. So optical excitation would be an option, but would be again quite challenging to prove, because in general, optical excitation leads to the switching only in one direction, which is determined by the type of major carriers. So, however, there is another approach to polarization control, which doesn't require any field application, which is based on the mechanical control. So realized by pressing the tip of the AFM against the surface of your material. So in this case, there is huge magnitude of the strain gradient that is generated in this material, and it has been shown several years ago that the action of this flex electric field would be equivalent to the action of just pure electric field. In other words, it would lead to the polarization reversal without any need to apply the electrical bias. So that's the approach that we decided to use. So we still were able to use PFM in order to visualize the resulting initial and resulting polarization state. So The 1T double prime MoS2 flake shown here, visualized in PFM before and after application of the mechanical stress. And you can see the significant change in the amplitude, meaning that polarization has been somehow amplified. But also there is a change in the phase signal, which means that polarization has been reversed. So of course, PFM is kind of prone to a number of artifacts, so you have to be really careful kind of to take it to the bank right away. So you have to have some independent verification of your PFM data. So we use SHG imaging exactly on the same sample. So we observed that the area subjected to mechanical stress indeed showed very different SHG signal. Surprisingly, it was weaker than in the kind of non-pole area. So that was not clear to us at the beginning. So we figured out later on that basically the mechanical pressure did not induce switching across the whole thickness of your flake. So which means that you had some kind of counterbalancing SHG signal. So that's why basically we had a reduction of the SHG signal in comparison to the area where polarization hasn't been before. So of course, mechanical pressure could lead to, again, transition to more stable state. So that was also a concern. So we decided to perform a characterization of the phase before and after application of the mechanical pressure and compare it with the electronic properties of the 2H phase. So you can see that this is the drain source currents versus gate voltage in the S prepared flakes, and after mechanical pressure, type of conductivity is the same. While in the 2H phase that was obtained by annealing this sample, so the type of conductance is completely different. So it means that we didn't induce transition to the 2H phase by mechanical pressure. So, but what did we find? So that was direct experimental proof. So through fabrication, generation, and observation of bipolar domain structure that could be transferred into each other. So that is very solid evidence. So another thing that was kind of very strange, that when we decided to check how deep this switching goes into the thickness, so we performed this type of measurements where we decided to flip our flakes like pancakes and look at these flakes from the opposite direction, expecting to see or not to see the mechanically produced pattern on the opposite side. So in this case, in the case of flake 1, so no traces of the mechanically switched area on the opposite side. Polarization direction, of course, is reversed, which is clear. But in the other case, so the polarization was the same, either you look from the top or from the bottom, which was very unexpected and very confusing until we figured out that's probably due to the absolutely unpolar, antipolar alignment of polarization in each individual monolayer. Basically, polarization develops in each monolayer irrespective of the polarization in the adjacent layers. And first principle calculations performed by Jorge, I'm putting you on spot here, show that indeed in this case, because of the very low value of polarization, so the polarizing effect wouldn't be that kind of drastic as in the case of the perovskite material. So therefore, there was not much effect on the stability of these systems when you have head-to-head or tail-to-tail configurations. So, and so here we going to the summary of this part. So again, large number of two-dimensional materials have been predicted to be ferroelectric. And there is a competition between ionic and covalent bond in these materials. So again, provides a wide possibility for investigation of their physical properties coupled to polarization. So experimental verification of this ferroelectric nature is extremely challenging. So probably conventional electric field-based approach wouldn't work. So again, alternative approaches based on mechanical and optical control could be investigated. This also would open a possibility for kind of investigation of different functional behavior of these materials. And of course, there are a lot of questions related to the mechanism behind the appearance of polar ordering related to strain, doping defects, interaction between the layers. So there is kind of wide open field for further studies, which I think promise to bring a lot of very exciting stuff. And with this, I would like to acknowledge a very fruitful collaboration with my colleagues at the University of Nebraska, so from the physics and chemistry departments, so from the University of Luxembourg and LIST, Jorge Iniguez, with the company behind the most useful AFM system for ferroelectric studies, and our other collaborators both in Europe and in the United States. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And I would be glad to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, I'm Ed of Univ here, and you showed that head-to-head structure after switching, right? But while you also showed how to do it as a student, how can you explain that looks like to me is the car? I can explain that. Why?
Okay, excellent question. So you're absolutely correct. So it sounds like kind of mutually contradictory if you have head-to-head, tail-to-tail patterns. So our assumption is that PFM picks up signal not from the whole thickness of the flake, basically only from the topmost layers where polarization has been switched. So this leads to the amplification of the signal. While in the as-prepared flake, you might have topmost flakes kind of arranged in the tail-to-tail or head-to-head alignment. And in this case, the amplitude signal would be smaller. So the fact is that we do not pick up the signal from the whole thickness.
What does it mean?
So the thinnest flake that we were able to switch was 5 nanometers. The thinnest. Below that, we were not able to demonstrate that it's possible to switch. I assume that it's possible, but thinner flakes are becoming too fragile. So it just led to the damage.
I am Arkansas. I like the presentation very much. I agree with you that probably these materials requires to mix different from ferroelectrics. I have 2 questions. It's taking the questions. In the first part of the presentation, what's the difference in ferroelectric field? And then the second question is for Jorge about that barrier that you calculated. You could tell the line.
Okay, thank you. So typical thickness of the MoS2 flakes that we're using, we're in the range of several nanometers, not more than 10 nanometers. Thickness of the ferroelectric layers, we're starting from 4 nanometers up to 20 nanometers. Jorge, your turn.
I'm very kidding me. It's scary. I'm not so much better than what we have. But can you go over the
You were saying that different vectors can happen. Yes.
So there is a difference. So what we just say about the energy of the reward.
It's very long. I don't remember. It's very, very.
You can look at this this your plot.
Depende da location. Let me say a couple of things about this. For our DJI rover, and this is a very section. So this makes it more resilient to whatever you do in the environment. Plus, this is the DA calculations better. So you can avoid extreme polarization. So it's not so surprising that you get the full equal depolarizing quick down from the tiniest slopes of those lines, and that connected is minima of the density. And very, very small in the energy story.
Perfect. I think time for one more. You just for
This is the University of South Carolina. So I have a children that have a structure and they're moving to. So what is the lattice mismatch has appeared in the
What is the latest mismatch between?
So in the MoS2 that introduced by
It's a huge lattice mismatch, more than 10%. So, but we didn't care about it because it was just transferred on the ferroelectric surface. You're talking about hybrid structures, right? So it was just transferred on the ferroelectric surface by mechanical exfoliation. So we didn't care about any kind of matching between the lattices.
So did it introduce any polar distortion in the
Just by putting it on a ferroelectric surface. I don't think so. We didn't expect, we didn't think about it, so we didn't investigate it.
I think we need to move on to the subject.
Your presentation.
Or maybe at 22, then I'll give you a final. It means that we've got this discussion. Okay, so the next speaker is Xiao. Also from Nebraska, isn't it? It's going to tell us a little bit more like the way in which Ferroelectric is